Your blood runs orange and blue. This is the pod for you. You're listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, hosted by EJ Stewart and Tommy Beer. Let's get to it, New York.
A win is a win, I guess. EJ Stewart, Tommy Beer. This is Orange and Blue Bloods, a New York Knicks podcast and Audacy WFAN original. We have a really great show for you guys. We will be talking about this Knicks win. They did survive the Miami Heat in Game 2. It was not their prettiest win at all. I'm very curious to hear what my guy Tommy Beer has to say about this win. We'll talk about what happened. We'll talk about what happened with Jimmy Butler not playing. Randall did play in this game. So we'll break everything down that happened in this game. Also, we have a great guest for you guys. We got Alex Donno. He co-hosts the Red Hot Hoops Miami Heat podcast with Audacy Sports Network. So we'll get his thoughts on Game 2 and his thoughts on this series from a Miami perspective. We've had some really great guests on the show, and Alex, I know, will bring the heat, no pun intended, as well. So we'll have that for you. And our last NBA award before the All-NBA stuff gets out, and Knicks will go home empty-handed. Executive of the Year not going to Leon Rose, despite the agenda I was trying to push. So I'll tell you guys where he finished. I'm not very happy about it. I'm very curious how Tommy feels about it. Speaking of Tommy, of course, joins me as always. Tommy, Game 2 is a dub, but how are you feeling after it?
If the Knicks win 4 games in the series, they're not going to ask how many points they won each game by. They're not going to ask if it was pretty, if the ratings were good, if everything, if it was an easy cruise to victory. It's the first to 4. Knicks got 1. You need 1 to get to 4. It was ugly. It was a rock fight, but I think that's kind of what we expected going to the series. They played their first must-win game of the postseason. People forget this is a relatively young group, not very experienced. This was an important learning lesson in how to win a game that you play poorly in. I thought some of the defensive game plans were a little bit flawed. Shot making in the first half was ugly, basically the first 3 quarters. But ultimately, Knicks dug it out. We got a best of 5, Knicks versus Heat, going down to South Beach. Series still very much on the table. And I think that's what you would hope for going into Game 2. And it's still the case coming out of Game 2. So let's talk a little bit about that ugly Game 2.
Yeah, it's tough to talk about a Knicks loss. It's better to talk about a Knicks win following a struggling, tough performance like that. So we'll get right to it. Again, this is Orange and Blue Bloods, a New York Knicks podcast, Audacy WFAN original, a podcast you can get wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Make sure you hit the auto download feature on your streaming service so you get these episodes every time we drop 3 times a week. This is episode 2 this week, so make sure you get all the episodes we drop again 3 times a week. Audacy app or wherever you get your podcast. Also, check us out on YouTube. You can catch us on the WFAN channel and the Audacy Sports channel as well to watch the video version of this podcast. So it was not pretty, but the Knicks survived a shorthanded Miami Heat team to squeak out a win in Game 2. The Heat were playing without Jimmy Butler, but put forth a very inspired effort thanks to the play of Gabe Vincent. He had 21 points in this one. Caleb Martin had 22 points in this one. The Knicks were trailing by as much as 6 in the fourth quarter and were finally able to get over the hump. Thanks to some big baskets from Jalen Brunson, who had 30 in this game. Josh Hart, he nailed some clutch threes in this one. He had 14, 11, and 9, almost got a triple-double in this one. He had some big threes, and that was the reason why the Knicks were able to pull ahead. This was the return of Julius Randle. Randle had missed more than a week's time with an ankle injury. He came back into the lineup. He looked pretty strong. He had a really good game, 25 points, 12 rebounds, 8 assists. RJ Barrett really carried the Knicks through some rough quarters there, especially the first 3 quarters of this game. But he was really one of the constants in this one. He had 24 on 8 of 17 shooting. He did not close this game, which was, by Tibbs' account, a coaching decision. I'm very curious what Tommy thought about that. But let's begin with why the Knicks were able to win this game despite the struggles in your eyes, Tommy. Like, this is a game to me, and I was in the building. It was a weird crowd. It was a tense crowd. And the Knicks didn't give them much reason to really cheer or really get after it. And I think the Heat played with house money. And I think that the crowd allowed them to feel very comfortable because the Knicks weren't giving them a reason to feel uncomfortable. So how are the Knicks able to win this game? And also, why did they struggle so much?
I'll answer the first question first. Knicks are down 6 points, 93-87. About 8 minutes left in the fourth. Garden's tight. Brunson comes down, hits a 3-pointer. Following possession is the 4-point play where Hartenstein sets a screen, gets a foul on Bam. Brunson knocks down the 3-pointer. Basically, from that stretch, credit to Spoelstra, credit to the crew of undrafted guys that basically came out of the woodwork to really make this a tight, contested, stressful game for Knicks fans. But at the end of the day, Brunson and Hart, the Villanova guys, kind of put the team on their back. And that was the final 7 minutes of regulation. Hart scored 10 points. Brunson scored 10 points. The entire Heat team combined scored 12 points. Two biggest shots of Josh Hart's probably NBA career. That first corner three with about 5 minutes left to put the Knicks up 3. Heat came back and cut it to 1. Hart hit that second 3-pointer. Keep in mind, the strategy for Miami coming into the series was to dare Josh Hart to take and make 3-pointers. He was 0 for he had missed 7 3-pointers in a row dating back to first quarter of game 4 of the Cleveland series. That was the last 3-pointer he had hit. Had missed 7 in a row. 0 for 4 in game 1, 0 for 2 first 3 quarters of game 2. Still, shot clock running down. Buries that 3. Crowd gets excited, hits another 3. Eventually hit those 2 free throws to seal the contest after the Duncan Robinson 3-pointer after the Julius Randle brain fart, which scared the bejesus out of everyone watching. So Brunson and Hart, is the answer to that. How did it? But I don't want to short shrift Isaiah Hartenstein. Played at, to me, he gets the game ball. His numbers don't jump out. Actually was rewatching the fourth quarter this morning, and I was stuck. It seemed everything that positive that happened for New York had his fingerprints all over it. I actually, in the post this morning, 7:30 mark. Again, Knicks are down 6. Knicks are down 5 at this point, actually. Hartenstein, 7-footer. 6:42, he sets the screen. 6:08, sets a screen on Cody Martin. Brunson makes a jumper over Duncan Robinson. 2 offensive rebounds the next possession. 4:45, Hartenstein sets a screen for Josh Hart. 4:07, Hartenstein has the screen assist for Brunson 3-pointer. In the game, had a game high 7 screen assists, leading to 17 Knicks points. His offensive rebounding, his heart, his hustle, his effort on both sides of the floor really were a difference maker for the Knicks in that contest. So special shout out to Isaiah Hartenstein. I think that's kind of the big picture, how the Knicks were able to pull away. The downside is that it was a close game, that the Knicks were losing heading into the halftime and losing with 8 minutes left. And I think a lot of that had to do with the defensive game plan going in. We knew once Jimmy Butler was ruled out that the only prayer that Miami had was to bomb in a ton of threes, get to the free throw line, muck up the game, make it ugly, and hopefully they hit more threes than the Knicks, and have a big discrepancy behind the arc. And essentially that's what they did. Attempted 49 threes, made 17. Fortunately for New York, they got a little cold at the end, but the drop coverage, having Mitchell Robinson drop behind, off screens was very frustrating. Again, you can live if Kyle Lowry and Duncan Robinson and Kevin Love and Max Strus are going to slice into the lane and and make layups or kick it, then you can live with that. You cannot allow with those guys shooting wide open threes. They had far too many of them. But eventually, Knicks got the job done. I'm sure you were frustrated by that defensive approach as well.
Yeah, I mean, sitting in the crowd for that game, and it was a great experience being in the Garden for that game. First time I was ever at a playoff game. But as I tweeted, I had dental appointments more enjoyable than that Knicks game. I got to be honest. It was tough to watch, and it was funny. It's bad when I tweet out this defense is awful, and then people are tweeting me, well, the offense is bad too. And then they tweeted me, well, you know what? You're right. This defense is bad. Like, that's how it was. It was like there were stretches in the game where you could have picked either side of the ball, and it's what was awful. There were stretches of the game where the defense was awful. There were stretches of the game where they could not score. That second quarter, I was like, what are they actually doing? Like, at a certain point, it just looked like the Knicks were playing with 2 guys. It looked like Randall and RJ were the only players the Knicks had doing anything offensively. It was a bizarre game. It's almost one of those games where if you're the Knicks, I almost feel like you say, okay, let's just flush that film down the toilet because nothing we did in that game is really going to help us win any game moving forward in this series. I think if you take some positives from this one, Randall looked really good coming from the ankle injury. And the fact that he once again was able to come back from an injury, having not played a certain amount of time, and be that productive is really impressive. I think once an accident, two's a trend, and there's three's evidence. We're at the part where two's a trend here, where I think he plays with a different level of focus coming off of an injury. Because when he came out in game 1 against Cleveland, we saw how he started that first half. It was stunning how well he played. And you're like, wow, this is he wasn't playing that great before he got hurt. This is the best he played in a while, that first half against Cleveland in game 1. And then we saw the rest of that series. He struggled so much in that series. You're like, what's going on? I really think that he's able to kind of get out of his head about the situation and the pressure. He can just focus on playing the game and staying healthy in the game. And I think that takes away a lot of the pressure because he played aggressive. He played a mostly clean game. He didn't make perfect decisions, but he also wasn't a disaster with the turnovers. He wasn't the reason why they were down. Offensively, defensively, he had a lot of issues, but offensively, he played really well. So that's one positive. I think the other positive I take away from it, Hartenstein was a monster. He was a beast. Him going after every loose ball, the way he was playing defense. He had a floater in the lane in the fourth quarter. He was awesome. Don't want to discredit him. Don't want to discredit Hart. Don't want to discredit RJ because he now is starting to put together 4 or 5 games out in a row where he's just getting 25. He looks like a bucket now. So that's really great news on that side. But I think the main takeaway from a positive standpoint has got to be Brunson being able to clearly kind of knuck up to fight through whatever he was going through. Because that was the worst first half I've ever seen Jalen Brunson play in a Knicks uniform. He was passive. He looked like he really couldn't explode. He just was out there. It's rare you watch a game and say Jalen Brunson's having zero impact, but that's what happened in the first half. He had zero impact on that game. And I know they said that there was a pep talk that he had at some point in that game that kind of got the team going. I don't know if he needed to get himself going or he just needed to kind of power through whatever ankle injury he's dealing with. We know that he was questionable coming into the game. But to see him change the entire landscape of that game with his shot making in the second half, powering through whatever physical issues he was dealing with, showed why he's a special player, why he is deserving of being, a franchise player for this team. Why, maybe in the future he ends up becoming the next captain of the New York Knicks. That to me is what I saw from him. That was a special performance from that regard. I'm kind of upset that they played so poorly that we kind of glossing over that. Played so poorly, you don't even want to celebrate how great Brunson was. But it's man, Brunson was playing on a clearly bad ankle, and the Knicks season was about to be over. They were about to lose that game and be probably dispatched in 4 games in this series if they don't win. And Brunson said, "Not on my watch," and that I think for that reason, Jalen Brunson deserves a lot of credit.
Yes, 100%. 23 points in the biggest half of the season, and the biggest half the Knicks have played in a decade. On a clearly, I will admit, yes, it was great to see him come through in the clutch and deliver like he had hoped. I am worried about Brunson's ankle going forward because this wasn't just he tweaked his ankle in the second quarter of game 1 and kind of scuffled through it. This is a sore ankle and just said it just kind of snuck up on him and started giving him pain. That concerns me. He tweaked it in the second quarter. You could see he was clearly in pain. That was concerning. As you mentioned, the first half was almost alarming in the fact that he just didn't have that lift. Shot was flat. Shot was short. So a ton of credit for him for white knuckling through the second half. But I will admit I'm concerned about that ankle going forward as the Knicks, likely looking at a 7-game series. If somehow they escape and move on to the next round, I have all the faith in the world in Brunson when he's healthy. Let's just hope he's, again, the 3 days of rest not only help Jimmy Butler, they will help Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle as well. Speaking of Randle, as you mentioned, a ton of credit for him. First Knick in history with 25, 12, and 8 assists in a playoff game. So, at least to match or exceed those numbers. Again, coming back. And I think you make a good point. When you think about it, Randall didn't fight with the referees yesterday. He
Nope.
wasn't, he wasn't, it's almost like he focused his energy on just showing that he was healthy and kind of, maybe he was just, okay, I just need to get through this game and not like expend excess energy worrying about calls or officials. All that kind of nonsense. It was clear that, and that's the best version of Randall, that focus.
Yeah.
Because there's intensity is always there, but sometimes it's kind of misused and funneled towards, counterproductive items like, foul calls and some other stuff, and teammates and,
trying to do too much. Yeah.
Trying to do too much and spins into the lane, etc. So I thought that was encouraging. So yes, but overall he looked a lot better than I thought he would physically. And again, he has 4 more days to come off. So hopefully he should be good to go Saturday and kind of, a little bit trending in that positive direction.
I mean, we talk about the issues from this game. I mean, offense, I'm not going to harp on it so much because I think a lot of it had to do with the Heat going zone, which, surprise, surprise, the Knicks can't score against the zone. Who would have guessed that? I mean, I feel like we've talked about that all season. They ended up kind of figuring it out. I think Hartenstein setting those good screens at the top of the key. Knicks deciding that their best effort was to screen on the ball, get Brunson kind of going downhill and kind of moving from there. And they were able to get some shots, and they started making shots. That was also a positive sign because they were missing everything in game 1. So they figured it out offensively. I'm not going to harp so much on that. This defense has got to get better. I mean, that's a game where you got guys missing assignments. Guys are dying on every screen. Guys just not paying attention. I mean, Julius Randle is 2 passes away, and he's, on the other side of the court, skipping it over to the baseline to a wide open Kalen Martin. He's nowhere to be found. Kyle Lowry's getting trapped in the corner. He's skipping all the way to the other side. Obi Toppin's guarding nobody. Jalen Brunson's 1 pass away on Strus, not denying the ball. They just swing the ball to the corner and shoots his a 3. Like, some of this stuff was just like insane. And then I didn't mention anything about the drop coverage, which was a lot of the threes that were happening too with Gabe Vincent. Like, I mean, they've got to tighten up. Now, I think the Heat get away with a lot of moving screens. It was driving me crazy. Like, they move on every screen. But look, that's how it's going to get called. So Knicks got to adjust. They got to start switching some of these more. I don't want to see Brunson guarding Strus. Like, I think Strus going out in that game also helped the Knicks because Strus moves more than any other player on the Heat. I don't know. If you have a guy with a bad ankle, why am I going to put him on a guy who they're going to run most of their action through now that Jimmy Butler is out? I thought that was a stupid decision to begin with, and it almost it almost cost the Knicks the season because Strus got really hot too. So defensively, they got to rip up pretty much that entire game plan, especially if this is a series where Butler doesn't play in game 3 and they kind of have to go with a similar game plan because the only chance they had was to shoot a bunch of threes, and the Knicks seem to be acquiescing to that because that's how they play every team. And that almost, again, cost them this game.
Yes. So the game plan was flawed in certain respects. Again, you had to chase shooters off the 3-point line. You can get beat in other ways. Also, and that also part of that is trusting your help defender. Funnel them in the middle and let Mitch and Hartenstein clean up the mess if and when they get into the paint. Because again, you don't have to chase Lowry around screens, and when he goes in the paint, he's not looking to shoot. He's looking to distribute.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's one thing. The other issue is just from a functionality standpoint, Brunson has never been a good defender. He's playing on one ankle. He is a horrible defender.
He's killing them right now. Yeah.
He's killing them on the defensive end, and Heat, rightfully so, are targeting it and attacking him relentlessly. And even when they don't attack him, he's short. He's not quick enough to close out on taller shooters. Even when on strong side help, he's 3 feet away and just doesn't have the quickness to get out to the shooters. Doesn't have the height to contest. So that's a mess on that end. They basically have to figure out a way. You can't take him off the floor because he's their best offensive player, the most consistent, efficient scorer. He's the best clutch shooter, so you can't take him off the floor late in games. So there's a lot there, and so they have to kind of game plan around that. But again, there are ways to hide him defensively. They've done that successfully throughout the season, and that's something that Tibbs has to work on going forward.
And I think Brunson's poor defense cost RJ finishing this game.
Yeah,
because Tibbs saw they couldn't stop anybody, and he's like, I gotta get Grimes in there. Okay, I gotta get another guy who can chase people around. And RJ was doing okay. I mean, Vincent did a couple of shots, but part of it's because RJ's guarding a point guard now.
Yes,
because Brunson couldn't guard his matchup.
It's unfair to ask to guard those quick.
Right. So RJ's kind of guarding a guy he shouldn't be guarding anyway. And I thought he was doing okay and he was giving good effort. I watched the game again this afternoon, and then he had to come out the game because they're like, "Yo, we need Grimes out there because again, Brunson, like we have to keep Brunson out there because he's the best player." But RJ was playing so well, like it put the Knicks kind of in a tough bind. I don't really blame Tiz for what he did. I know some people were upset about sitting RJ because RJ was playing so well, but to me, that game was about the Heat essentially running out of points. Like at a certain point, that Heat team was only going to score for so many points. I think for what's the name standpoint, I think he was like, we got to make sure we keep them at whatever it's called, 108 or whatever they had, like 101. Keep them to that and not let them go above that, and we'll be fine. I think that's essentially what happened. They kind of outlasted them.
Yeah, listen, those guys are, the reason they're not stars is because they can hit shots, and even big pressure packed games, Hayward Highsmith can make a few threes and those other and Duncan Robinson, etc. But when it comes down to those big boy those fourth quarter clutch, those when the stars come out, that's when you need Butler to step up and then Hero can hit those kind of shots, hit those hero shots. Whereas the Knicks had, Brunson's built for that. Hart is the guy that his whole life has been preparing for, hitting those three. He's like Shaq at the free throw line. He'll make him when he counts, essentially. And that's what he did. A couple things on the decision to bench RJ down the stretch. I did not have a problem with it. Not even second guessing because it worked out. In addition to defensively, again, RJ competed offensively, and RJ was awesome in the first half. The Knicks aren't close enough to make a run and win the game in the fourth quarter if RJ doesn't put them on. RJ and Randall basically don't keep the team afloat, and essentially Barrett again, a couple first halves in a row now where he's put the team on his back. So this is certainly not to knock RJ. Was looking at some numbers this morning. Last 5 playoff games, dude is averaging, where's the numbers here? 23.2 points on 52.5% shooting to go along with 5.2 rebounds. How about this stat, Basketball Reference? Barrett is one of 6 players in NBA history, age 22 or younger, to score at least 19 points and shoot over 47% in 5 straight playoff games. The other 5, LeBron, Dwight Howard, Amari, Kareem, and Jerry West. Those are the 5 players in history that have done that. So Barrett's playing incredibly well. They need him, but the issue is with Barrett on the floor. Even though we knock down his threes, he doesn't draw the respect from the Heat perimeter defenders that you would like. And ditto for Hart. They're again through the first 84 minutes, before the final 5 minutes of the fourth quarter of game 2, they were essentially leaving Hart alone. They were giving him the Isaac Okoro treatment in the corner. And what that does is when Brunson plays alongside those 2 dudes, it kind of cramps the floor a little bit. And essentially the Heat were playing like a 1-3-1 kind of hybrid zone. Even when they weren't going straight zone, they were really, daring other players to shoot. When Grimes is on the floor, even though Grimes hasn't hit a bunch of 3-pointers in the series, really this whole postseason hasn't been effective. Teams know, the scouting report tells you, do not give that guy open looks. Don't cheat off in 2 steps. You need to stay within decent closeout distance of that player. I don't care if he's 0 for 7. Watch that guy shoot. Don't give him too many. And we saw the final 7-8 minutes, Hartenstein with some screen and rolls up top, some back screens, etc. The floor was a lot more spaced, and Brunson had a lot more room to work with Grimes on the floor, kind of spacing. So that Grimes gravity helped the Knicks offensive in addition to his defensive contributions. Long story short, they need to find a way to get him more minutes going forward, because even if he's not taking shots, he's a threat to make shots. And that really helps the guys on the floor. It's not fair to RJ, who's played really well. So maybe those minutes come at IQ's costs. Who we'll talk about him. He continues to struggle. But long story short, I don't know if that means switching back up and putting Grimes back in the starting lineup. That's something they have to consider. Hart, is going to be closing, and maybe bring him in with 6 minutes or so. But there are some things that they kind of need to work out there.
And also, Hart's got to shoot the ball because there were a lot of – he had zero confidence in his shot the first half. He wasn't even looking to shoot. They were daring to shoot, and he wouldn't take those shots. Like, he's got to shoot the ball. Like, if they're going to leave him open like that, like, he's got to be aggressive. And thankfully, late in the game where the season's on the line, he knew he had no choice but to put these shots up. Some of them shot clock running out. He has to continue to do that because if he does not shoot the ball, that helps the Heat defense. and he was hurting the team offensively by him not shooting the ball in that first half. So Knicks able to survive in this game, 111-105. These teams don't play again until Tuesday. That's when the series will shift to Miami. The Knicks and Heat are tied 1-1 as the series heads to South Beach for games 3 and 4. And joining us to provide a Miami perspective on the series is Alex Donno. He co-hosts the Red Hot Hoops Miami Heat podcast for the Audacy Sports Network. He also does great work covering all things Miami sports, including my beloved Miami Hurricanes, something I probably mentioned a couple of times briefly on this podcast for Locked On Canes. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. Me and Tommy really appreciate it.
Yeah, EJ and Tommy, thanks for having me. And I'm just glad we can be enemies again, right? Because I came up in the late 90s. I mean, I was born in the 80s, but what really cemented my love for basketball was the Heat-Knicks rivalry in the late 90s and Pat Riley being such a huge part of that, the whole Pat the Rat thing. And that's the guy who was the architect of the Miami Heat that we know today. And I've always been looking to rekindle that rivalry. And, I said it before this series started. I thought this was going to be a 7-game type of series and every game going to be close coming down to the wire. And that's the way it's played out these first couple of games. So I think we'll be seeing a lot of each other for the next little bit here, because I think we're probably going to get 5 more games of this.
The world is a better place when the Heat and Knicks fans hate each other.
Yeah, I've loved the trash talk from Heat fans. I gotta admit, I feel like the LeBron era, I don't want to say softened you guys, but I feel like it was so easy. The championships that came, and you guys came out of that with such a really solid squad. It was almost like you guys kind of became just kind of the establishment of the NBA. You guys didn't have any rivalry, so we really didn't see a lot of trash talk from Heat fans as much. But I feel like this series has really revived that, and I've seen so much on the timeline. So it's been good vibes. Feels a lot like the late 90s with the trash talk on the fans. Maybe not the physical play on the court, but the beef with the fans is still real.
Well, and I'll add something to that, EJ, because there's, just based on the generational thing, there's, a lot of younger Heat fans who don't really remember a whole lot before the Big Three era, right? I mean, I'm an old man in my late 30s, but I know enough Heat fans in their 20s who it kind of started for them in the Big Three, or if not, it maybe started for them in 2006 with Dwayne Wade winning that championship. But I think that this series and the way that ESPN and TNT are milking it with some of that old footage, right? Some of the old footage from the late 90s. And it's kind of causing a lot of young fans to kind of dig a little bit deeper into the archives and learn what this was all about. So I'm all for it.
Yeah, it's been great to see some of the old Knicks. I kind of want to see some old Heat. I want to see them Dan Marley. I don't know, Rashawn Leonard. I don't know where he's at. If they can get some of these guys in there in the building for these games 3 and game 4, that'd be awesome. So we're 2 games in. Series is tied. I got to ask you, from the Heat perspective, how is Heat Nation feeling being tied 1-1 going back to South Beach?
I think that there is a little bit of what I feel is an overreaction in an optimism sense, thinking, because I'll say this, guys. We've all been doing this for way too long to think that one game can define an entire series. Like every game, every matchup is going to be different. So I find that the attitude of a lot of Heat fans is, hey, it's kind of okay that Butler didn't play in game 2 and the Heat lost game 2 because they stole back home court advantage, and look how competitive they were without Jimmy and without Tyler, and they were really competitive in game 2. I didn't think they were going to be when I found out Jimmy didn't play, but I think there's an overconfidence that comes from that, in thinking that, hey, this team led most of the game and it didn't really get away from them until around the final 5.5 minutes without having a superstar on the floor. So that means, assuming Butler comes back game 3 and beyond, people feel like this is going to be really easy. Got their split in New York. Jimmy's going to be back. They're going to have no problem. To me, every single game tells a different story, guys. And the Heat, they took game 1 in a game where the Knicks shot uncharacteristically poorly from 3. I think that had a lot to do with it. And, the Knicks did what they had to do in game 2 with their season on the line. And guess what? If the Knicks can get a split in South Florida, they can take home court advantage right back. So honestly, I think in Butler not playing in game 2, and Spo said that it wasn't gamesmanship, trusting our medical staff. They made the decision for Jimmy that he shouldn't play. Still, with him not playing, I felt like the Heat surrendered that second game. But if they could have won that game and taken a 2-0 lead, then I'm thinking Heat in 5 or 6, right? But since they split those first 2 games, now I'm thinking it's probably going to end up in a game 7 and then winning a game 7 at MSG. Not impossible for the Heat, but going to be really, really difficult. So that's kind of the way I'm looking at this. I think this is going to come down to the wire because the Heat couldn't quite close that game out in game 2.
I agree with you. That could be a game that they look back on. Alex, but just circling, we'll get to Jimmy Butler and his availability for game 3 and how the Heat adjust one with the other. But just kind of big picture, obviously Heat didn't play up to expectations during the regular season, kind of staggered into the postseason, got there, and then looked like a different team, highest scoring team in the first round, led the league in offensive efficiency against a quality Bucks team who most people, including myself, thought would win the championship this season. Was it as simple as them flipping the switch? Was there some other stuff going on that just kind of took time to kind of figure out? Or what's been the difference between kind of the playoff Heat and the regular season Heat thus far?
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff. Now, one person who can flip that switch is Butler. He just he cares so much more in the playoffs, guys. I mean, in a lot of these regular season games, he's in his 30s with a lot of mileage because he played all those years under Tom Thibodeau, who kind of sucked all the life out of him for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
And so Jimmy conserves himself during the regular season, and in a lot of regular season games, he just doesn't really decide to kind of turn it on until the fourth quarter, where in the playoffs, he pretends everything is the fourth quarter. So that's one. But for everything else, for the Heat having such a disappointing regular season and just like barely sneaking into the playoffs, a lot of it just had to do with terrible injury bug. It was biting the team throughout the year. I do think Eric Spoelstra, he's kind of this masochist where he kind of likes having to play all these undrafted guys because, like, I don't know, he's like a mad scientist. So I think he kind of enjoys it. I don't think Riley and the front office enjoy having so many guys out throughout the year. When they made those trades and those deals to acquire Kevin Love specifically and Cody Zeller, it took them a long time to gel, and they experimented with K Love in a number of different ways to find his role. Started out as a starter, then ended up being a bench guy, but now sometimes he has to start depending on who's in and who's out of the lineup. So everything was just really, really herky-jerky throughout the regular season. And I think under Butler's leadership, specifically through that Milwaukee series where he was playing out of his mind, I just think the way he played just kind of inspired everybody else to fall in line. And you even saw that in game 1 when he rolled the ankle and he stayed in and couldn't really move around a whole lot. Just him being out there, I think, had an effect on lifting his teammates down the stretch of that game. So it was the regular season was almost like a throwaway because, you end up sneaking in through the play-in, but then you knock out the number 1 seed in the first round. So everything just kind of, outside of the fact you're not going to have any home court advantage the rest of the way, that's unfortunate. But outside of that, the seeding doesn't even really matter anymore. The regular season was just like, it was like a training session. It was like you were running on a treadmill for 82 games.
Yeah, and to Jimmy Butler's credit, and we kind of poked fun at him all season, but he talked about, saying, "Oh, I'll play serious when it's time to play serious." And, it took the fourth quarter of playing game, last game elimination against the Bulls, I guess, to pull it out. But then since then, the Heat, their whole team has looked like an entirely different team. So credit to Butler. But as we talk about Jimmy, and you go beyond this game 2, where he doesn't play, you have, now for him almost a week layoff from game 1 to game 3. So plenty of time to potentially get ready. How confident are you that he'll be able to get back to being the Jimmy Butler we saw in the Milwaukee series? And if he's not, how confident are the Heat ability to kind of mask that and find a way to still come away with the series if Jimmy Butler is indeed 50 to 75% of what he normally is?
Yeah, like on the one hand, the ankle roll looked really bad in live time and his reaction to it. But there was pretty quick proclamations after the game that, hey, it's not as serious as it looks. And then, the next day I see him, he's out on Fifth Avenue shopping, wearing a fanny pack. And I thought, oh, okay, so he's going to play game 2. And then he was a late scratch in game 2. I mentioned that they defaulted to the medical staff on him, but I can't help but feel that if the Heat were down 0-1 and not up 1-0, I think he would have played in game 2. So I think that they were being a little bit cautious, and they kind of punted that game thinking, we can get him 5 days off in between games, get him back home to South Florida. I can't say with 100% certainty, but I think he's going to be pretty close to himself when he comes back. All that extra rest. And, he's basically the entire time he's been in a Heat uniform, he's always been playing through minor injuries. If it's not ankles, it's been knees. He's basically been on a maintenance program for the last 3 years. So he's always been able to kind of zone some of that stuff out when the lights are brightest. I think it's going to be one of those things where by the time this Heat playoff run is over, whether it's in this series or, into the NBA championship, Jimmy's just going to basically spend like 2 weeks straight in the cold tub, just like soaking all of his issues, because he's been playing through a lot of stuff. So I think we're going to get pretty close to the best version of Butler by the time he comes back.
2 games into the series now, you've had an up close look at the Knickerbockers. Just curious, as a kind of an outside look in, your thoughts, maybe some expectations you had of the club prior to these first 2 games of the series versus kind of what you've seen. Is there anything that's kind of stood out or surprised you thus far?
Hartenstein is an absolute pest, and this guy is like he's one of those. I would love him in a Heat uniform. Like, he annoys you in any other uniform, but he does so many of those little things, and he gave Bam so many problems. So to have a role player like that is big. Randall, as he gets healthier, obviously he killed the Heat in one of those regular season games with a game winner. He's a thorn in anybody's side, especially in Miami's side. Super impressed by what Hart does on both ends of the floor. And I'm just impressed overall at Jalen Brunson. I mean, that's going to be, he's the type of player, budding superstar type of guy, where whoever wins this series, if the Heat win the series, you're going to look back and probably Butler's going to have to be the MVP of the series for Miami. If the Knicks win the series, Jalen Brunson is going to be the guy who's got to lift that team on their shoulders. And I think overall, fellas, from top to bottom, this is the best version of the New York Knicks I've seen in a long time. And I think that they're the deeper overall basketball team, especially with the Heat not having Tyler Hero, because he can kind of be that number 2 scoring option behind Jimmy. So I think the Knicks definitely have like the better overall team. I think Butler's the guy who's is what we saw in that Bucks series. He's got the highest ceiling if he's on. So if the Heat win the series, it's probably because they've got one of the hottest players in the playoffs right now. Or if the Knicks can just keep playing team ball, they could end up being the guys who prevail here.
Wow. And then on that same note, regarding what you've seen from the Knicks, I'm curious, having now watched this series and even maybe some of the regular season, what are you surprised about, or what has stood out to you from what the Heat have been able to do to the Knicks that maybe you didn't expect to see coming into this series in terms of the success they've had?
Yeah, well, I'll definitely say coming out of game 2, the success that Miami's undrafted mob has had in this series, I think they combined for like either 71 or 74 points, undrafted players in game 2. I thought maybe the first 2 games would be a little bit more low scoring than they were. I can remember on our most recent episode of Red Hot Hoops, we were looking at the total in game 2, and it was I'm sure it changed once Jimmy was ruled out, but like in the early afternoon yesterday, it was 208, and I'm like, I think it's probably going to creep over 208. My co-host Hollywood was like, no, I think it's going to be under 208, like 1990 style type of game, but they went way over that total. So I think that surprised me a little bit, because these are both strong defensive teams, and in the case of Miami, they didn't really start scoring over 100 points per game consistently till the playoffs. Like the regular season, they were playing 90s ball most of the way. They were, when they were losing games, they were in the 90s. When they were winning games, they were scoring like 102. So, wow. I think that the just the success that Miami had from, Gabe Vincent and, his 21 points, Caleb Martin, his 22 points in game 2. I think one of the things, guys, that we could probably get a little bit more into this, that was a little bit of an unpleasant surprise from a Miami standpoint, and this has been annoying me since last night. How is it in a game when Jimmy sits out, Bam Adebayo can't put up more than 10 shots? Yeah. Can't put up more than 10 shots. Like, come on, man. He affects the game in a lot of other ways. He's a really good passing big man, 6 assists, but when you've got no Jimmy and you obviously have no Tyler Hero, who's usually the second scoring option, even if you didn't have a great shooting night, if Bam is trying a lot of like long range jumpers, you got to try more than 10 shots in the game. And he, he copped to it afterwards. He put the loss on himself and all that. But I thought, guys, it was a no brainer when Jimmy was ruled out. I'm thinking win or lose, Bam's got to put up at least 15, 20 shots, and they need, 25 points from Adebayo, something like that. And he just didn't have enough.
Yeah, the Knicks game plan all season under Tibbs has been kind of wall off the paint and force guys to shoot from the outside. So from a New York perspective, the thinking was, I think a lot of fans were worried that they'd give up too many open looks. And actually, the Heat taking 49 3-pointers was the most 3-pointers the Knicks have ever allowed, most attempts the Knicks have ever allowed in a postseason game in franchise history. And the 17 makes are the most they've ever allowed as well. So I think Knicks fans are worried about that. But I agree with you, and to Bam's credit, he did take responsibility, for probably not producing as much as Heat fans would have hoped. Last one for me, just kind of, you've talked about kind of the contributors, the undrafted free agent gang. When Hero went down in game 1 against Milwaukee, I think the thought was, okay, this is a low scoring team, and now they're really going to struggle to score, missing, their second or third, best offensive option. So how has we've kind of gotten a look at it now. Vincent has hit some big shots and Kevin Love. Is that just basically the idea is just to spread the wealth even further? And that's actually opened up some more scoring opportunities for Butler and other guys. But how has the loss of Hero kind of impacted the team over these last couple?
Well, I think what you just described is plan B. I think plan A has just been Jimmy's got to score basically enough points for he and Tyler's averages. I think that was kind of plan A. But the plan B part, something kind of interesting without Tyler and even without Jimmy. I'm not saying they don't miss these guys. Believe me, they do. But the ball was moving really well for most of that game. Like
Absolutely.
that. So and that's why I say that Spo is a little bit sadistic and that Eric Spoelstra kind of likes when he's got to coach these underdogs. Because I think that's when you really see Spoelstra basketball, like nothing in isolation. He's got plays drawn up for everything and the ball never stops moving. So I think we saw a lot of that. But then the problem is you get down to closing time, you get down to the final 5 minutes and you're at MSG. And when you don't have a real stone cold killer out there, there's no way to keep up. And that was what I was kind of wondering throughout that game was, it didn't happen until pretty late. Like, are the Knicks going to pull away at some point? And then, even when they started to pull away, I'll give the Heat credit. Like Duncan Robinson hit a big 3 late. Strus had some big shots. Like the Heat never really went away. And I wanted to ask you guys something.
Yeah,
if I could, as far as and EJ, you can start, and then Tommy, you could take it from there. Because I talked a little bit earlier about kind of like the overconfidence from some Heat fans saying, like, we got the split we needed. Butler's coming back. We're still in great shape. Heat in 5, all that stuff. How do you guys feel from a Knicks standpoint, EJ? Like, were you a little bit frustrated with the idea that Butler didn't play a lot of people, and they were, I think, 10.5-point favorites, the Knicks, by the time the game tipped off? Were you a little bit disappointed by not running them out of the gym last night? And what do you think that says about the series?
Yeah, it was highly frustrating. I was in the building, and it was interesting. It was a building that was a little tense, I would say. Not the kind of animal zoo kind of crowd we've seen in these other playoff games. And I think that the Knicks fans kind of knew from the beginning, once Butler was out, there was a lot of pressure on Knicks to kind of dispatch this Heat team very quickly. And then once that did not happen, I think the Knicks team and the building all got really tense. I think it wasn't so much, I think for me, frustrating that they didn't just blow them out on just in a vacuum. It was the process to why they could not dispatch this team. It was how poorly they were defensively. The Heat have not been a great shooting team, but they've shot really well in these playoffs. And it seemed like there was like a lack of respect for the Heat's outside shooting, especially in a game where you know that you don't have Butler. So their one shot really is to launch as many threes as possible. I think that was a frustrating part, was that the Knicks should kind of understood the game plan, understood the assignment, and it seemed like they did it. And they kind of played around way too long in that game. So that was the frustrating part for me. And I think it does temper some of my expectations moving forward. I think a lot of Knicks fans, it was very interesting, because I know you could probably speak to it as a Heat fan. Like, I felt a lot of Knicks fans, saw the Heat beat the Bucks and said, "Oh, this is, we got past the Eastern Conference Finals." And I think that Heat fans probably saw the Knicks beat the Cavs and said, "Oh, well, this is great. Donovan Mitchell's out of the way. Now we got a path to the Eastern Conference Finals." So I think that it kind of presents an interesting matchup. I think both kind of fan bases came in maybe a little overconfident, having really kind of shocked the NBA world with both of their series wins. Maybe the Knicks not necessarily win, but being so dominant against Cleveland, and Miami both winning and dominating, but Milwaukee the way they did. So long answer, but yeah, I thought that the frustration was just the lack of focus for the Knicks in that game too.
Yeah, I'll piggyback a little bit on EJ there. I thought the process and the way they got to that, one possession game, 5 minutes left, was a little bit frustrating. Again, drop coverage, letting, you knew the Heat going in had to hit a ton of 3-pointers in order to kind of hang around without Jimmy Butler in the game. But I thought the spread was way too high without Butler. Listen, this series, as you noted in the beginning, this series is going to be a rock fight. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be physical. Whether Jimmy Butler's on the floor, whether Randall's on the floor, guys are going to get after it. The Heat are, Spo's one of, if not the best tactician in the NBA, one of the best. And I thought going into game 2, especially when Butler was ruled out, the pressure obviously was already a must-win game for the Knicks. Now without Butler, the Heat were playing complete house money. Gabe Vincent and Max Strus and Duncan Robinson, who was, had a poor game in game 1. Those guys, worst case scenario, they get blown out. Hey, let's go have some dinner in Manhattan. Nobody expected us to
Carbone with Aaron Rodgers.
Exactly, and I just thought that was kind of the vibe that the Heat could come in with it. Whereas the Knicks were playing with a ton of pressure on them. Randall obviously coming back, first time he had played in a week, looked to be moving around pretty well. Brunson nursing an ankle injury is a major concern. He looked, only made 1 field goal, made his first 3-pointer in the corner in the first quarter, missed 5 in a row before halftime. So I thought there were definite cause for concern, not just with the score, but how it got there. As you mentioned, Hartenstein had a big impact in the second half, and the other thing about it, you talked about how when Butler was out, the ball moved more freely. Randall coming back, the Knicks tends to move the ball a lot better when Randall's not there to kind of eat up all the positives he brings to the table. Ball slows down a little bit. Obviously because Randall's usage rates is quite high. They got to work that back into the mix. So there's a lot of moving parts there. But ultimately at the end, the Knicks, with Brunson and Hart hitting those big clutch threes and Hartenstein getting offensive rebounds and setting screens, etc., was the difference. So, as I wrote about this morning, they don't call it a must-win pretty game. They just call it a must-win game.
I like that.
So I think that's kind of where the Knicks fan, should probably be thinking of it. You lost game 1, you had to split 2, now just go down to Miami. And hey, we got a 5-game series, Knicks versus Heat. I think we've been there before. I forgot how it turned out, but
don't remind me about that one.
But it should be fun.
Well, and it's funny you bring up that 5-game series, because that was one of the few times in history that an 8 seed took out a 1. So I feel like the Heat exercised that demon a little bit, taking out Milwaukee, right? Because that was only the 6th time that ever happened. So it's like it didn't make me forget about that series against the Knicks, but it softened the blow a little bit.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing for both these teams is you talk about a clear path, not just to the Eastern Conference Finals now, but to the finals. I mean, the Celtics look infinitely vulnerable. Whatever's going on, they are obviously losing the game without Embiid. And now Embiid comes back, so we'll see if the Celtics can tie it up. But can Embiid stay healthy? And either team would have to like their chances against the Sixer-less, Embiid-less Sixer team. So we'll see how that plays out. But so many interesting storylines, but that's one of them. There's, heading into game 3, the pressure shifts a little bit back to Miami, but I think both teams recognize there's a significant opportunity to make some noise here.
And real quickly, before I ask how you see the series playing out, as a longtime Heat fan, it's funny. I feel like Tony's probably annoyed about it because I've talked so much about this Knicks Heat rivalry and talked about the favorite memories I had as a Knicks fan during the rivalry. And I'm curious, as a Heat fan, what is your favorite memory from the Knicks Heat rivalry? Like, I know, the Knicks won a lot of those series, so we have a lot of thoughts of them winning, but from a Heat fan's perspective, you guys had some big wins. You won in '97.
Listen, before you answer, we don't say PJ Brown's name on this podcast.
That limits my options a little bit. But in that series, when there was like a melee going on the court, I recall Jeff Van Gundy clinging to Alonzo Mourning's leg. It's like one of my favorite snapshots, and that was And that was just such, it was pandemonium. Like that series, the end of that, it was just so crazy and so wild. I was like, I think I was a 7th or 8th grader at the time, and that just got me so pumped for playoff basketball. And that's always what it should be. You know, I'm sure the final scores of those games were like in the 80s and in the 90s at most. It was just so much more physical back then. And there seemed to be like, you know, I'm sure there was a professional admiration, but there seemed to just be like a hatred between those two teams and those fan bases, which everyone's too nice these days. You don't get nearly as much of that. But yeah, it was that series for me, because, you know, in most of those late 90s series, the Knicks would end up getting the better of Miami. That was the one time where it's like, okay, we got this one. And that name that we shall not speak was certainly a big part of that.
Yeah, it's funny. And like being in 7th, 8th grade, that's a great time. Cause like I always talk about how I was like 8 or 9 years old, you know, between like 8 and 11, I guess, during those runs. And that's kind of when you first really kind of grow your love for the NBA. Like, I think that's a great time. And I'm happy I lived during that time and that series happened. But I think if there was a second time I could say when would I have wanted to be in terms of age during that series, I think like that's the perfect time. But that's when like now, like all you care about is sports, probably. All you care about is that stuff. So you're like fully invested, and it's everything that means the world to you. So that's an awesome time to kind of be around watching those classic games.
Yeah, no doubt. What about you guys? I'm sure that specific series was probably not the one you would pinpoint. No. So
no.
Where do you guys go?
Yeah, I mean, Allen Houston's shot is hanging up in my.
Oh, see that I think on Red Hot Hoops, I'm gonna ban that name.
Yeah, sorry, but yeah, that Allen Houston shot. I mean, you know, that was the shot. Never forget where I was in my living room. You know, had to call my dad on his terrible cell phone to tell him what happened. It was this, you know, this 1999, so he has one of the first ever cell phones, probably. Yeah, that was definitely by far the number one for me.
Yeah, I think the Houston shot is, you know, in Knicks lore. Listen, that's probably the last big shot, big moment the Knicks have had, you know, in the 21st century has not been kind to the franchise. So, yeah, I think we got to go with Allen's.
I'll tell you another one for me in a little bit more of a modern era. And you know, this was, you know, the whole when the Heat stomped out Linsanity, and when I think it was the same series when Amari Stoudemire, who would end up being on the Heat later in his career, when he smashed the fire extinguisher in frustration. That was they were trolling him for years down in Miami about that.
Yeah, I had so much hope for that series too, because like, you know, like Lynn had got hurt, so he didn't play.
Yeah, that's right.
But the Knicks were playing so well up until that point, and then they just got smoked in game one. And they lost by like 100 points in game one, and I was like, oh, this. And then Amari breaks his hand or hurts his hand, cuts his hand, and the series is over. So. Yeah, bad memories there, but it's nonetheless, you know, this is why this rivalry is so awesome, because you got both sides have their bragging rights, and someone's gonna be right here. Someone's gonna be bragging after this series. But Alex Donno, you got to make sure you catch Red Hot Hoops, Miami Heat podcast, Audacy Sports Network. Catch all of his work, also covering the Miami Hurricanes as well. Locked On Canes. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Dude, it's my pleasure. And guys, hopefully we can do this again, maybe in this series, because again, I think it's probably going to go 7. So we'll see.
I think we agree.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, guys.
There, I want to wrap today's podcast quickly talking about the award season kind of being finished. So we saw Joel Embiid was named MVP on Tuesday, so congrats to him. And on Wednesday, our final award for this season, we had Monty McNair being named the Executive of the Year. McNair is the general manager of the Sacramento Kings. That means that Leon Rose did not win this award. Now, McNair got 16 out of 30 first-place votes. Leon Rose finished in 8th place among executives up for this award. He had just 2 second-place votes and 1 third-place vote. Kobe Altman of Cleveland and Justin Zanuck of Utah finished in the top 3. I gotta be honest, I think that this is a load of crap that Leon Rose finished in 8th. Especially when I see the guys that were ahead of him. When I look at Kobe Altman and Zanuck in Utah, I don't know why Justin Zanuck's there. I'm sorry. I don't know why he's there. He traded away their core. They had a decent season, but now they're not in a position to draft that high in the first round. I just don't. The jury seems to be out. I mean, I guess trading away Gobert and getting so much assets, I guess, is why
the
they gave it to
trade
him.
was maybe the most lopsided trade in NBA history. So
It is, but it's like for me, Tommy, it's like okay, so because of to me, it's part of that is because of what Gobert did in Minnesota. Like I don't know, like if you should get credit for Gobert failing in another place, you know.
And Walker Kessler played well for Utah, but I
played good. Yeah, I don't know. I thought Zhang, they gave him a lot of credit there. Kobe Altman, Utah. I mean, Cleveland had a great jump, but to me, the Knicks went from being a team that was outside the playoffs, had a terrible season last year, to being the 5th seed. Cleveland was in the play-in last year and moved up to 4. They were the 9th seed in the Eastern Conference. The Knicks moved up way more spots than Cleveland, and they came from they started with less. You know, they didn't have Evan Mobley, they didn't have two all-stars in their team, and Jared Allen and Darius Garland. So for the Knicks to make the jump that they did, knowing that the moves that they did kind of changed their entire season, one, starting in the offseason with Bronson, and then two, with the Josh Hart trade, I think Leon Rose finishing in 8th place, this is crap. Like, I don't know. Like, I really thought that he'd at least finish in the top. I think he should have won this award, quite frankly. Even the McNair, I think McNair's a great guy. He could definitely have won this. But to me, like, I don't know. You have a problem with Leon Rose finishing in 8th? I have a big problem with this.
I do. I'm not going to lie to you. Listen, you want to make the case that Monty McNair should win the award? I'll listen. Even though it seems like he's getting credit for this bonus trade, which actually happened the prior
season. It happened last season. Exactly.
I mean, the Herter trade was great. The Monk signing was terrific. The hiring of Mike Brown, the Kings were one of the best stories of the year. You want to make a case for him? I'll listen. Kobe Altman, Cleveland, pulled the trigger on Donovan Mitchell. Again, this is strictly regular season. You want to say that he was instrumental, and you want to give him votes. I understand. Again, the Zanuck, Utah, Danny Ainge stuff. We talked about it. I didn't love the Mitchell trade from their perspective, but they did get an all-star back, a young all-star, and the Gobert trade was insanely lopsided. Right place, right time, yada, yada. That being said, those are the only 3 guys I'm going to listen to that you can give a vote ahead of Leon Rose for. I've written about this. We've talked about this. What was the best free agent signing in the NBA last offseason?
Brunson.
Jalen Brunson signing. What was the most impactful trade at the deadline? You want Kevin Durant? Yes. We'll leave Kevin Durant aside, in which the team gave up.
I'll be that guy. I'm including Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant played almost 0. He played almost 0 regular season games for the Suns. I know they didn't lose games without him, but they didn't play many games with him. The Knicks were in the midst of trying to stay out of the play-in, and Josh Hart played all of these games. They had one of the best records in the NBA since Josh Hart gained. So we're going impactful. Now, you're not best trade or best player getting moved, but impactful trade, I'm still taking Josh Hart, even over Kevin Durant.
Was there a better $8 to $10 million signing than Isaiah Hartenstein?
Hard to argue that one.
I'd have to look at them, but there's probably some float around there. But it's, in terms of impact, that's right up there. The Mitchell Robinson contract looks like a tremendous value after he played well in the regular season, and then, performed. Obviously, we're not going to factor in the playoffs, et cetera. All that being said, there was one person that the front office executive responsible for that was one man. Obviously, the front office team, but the guy you can vote for from the Knicks' perspective is Leon Rose. I'm not sure. You can tell me who finished 5th, 6th, 7th in the voting.
Yeah, I have the list here. I mean, you had Calvin Booth finished 4th. I mean, KCP trade, good trade. The team didn't change that much. I don't know. I would not have voted him over Leon Rose. Yeah. Brad Stevens, he got 2 first place votes. Again, I mean, it's because of, I guess, Brogdon. Okay. A team that went to the finals last year. Yes. Number 2 seed last year is the new number 2 seed this year. And okay. And then you got Joe Horst from Milwaukee. I have no idea why he got any votes. Milwaukee was the same team last season. They had Jay Crowder.
They traded 4 second-round picks for Jay Crowder. He didn't
play. So I don't know what that's about. And then James Jones from Phoenix got a 1 first-place vote. He got a bunch of third-place votes. And that was a team that was disappointing during the midseason. They traded for Kevin Durant. He basically didn't play during that whole regular season. Mikal Bridges is like a star.
EJ, we'll talk about it over the summer, but a conversation needs to be had. They gave up 4 first-round draft
Yeah.
picks, Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson.
And a pick swap.
Listen, if you're a team, let's say they, who knows what happens with CP3? Maybe they lose in 5 or 6 to the Nuggets. Like, if you're the Suns going forward, would you rather have KD at $50 million a year or Mikal Bridges at 25? And I'm not even talking about Cam Johnson in the 4 first-round picks. So, there's a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, this list is garbage. I'm sorry, this list is garbage. Like, I know we had our fun with Brogdon. I think that IQ should have been 6th man of the year, but Brogdon had a great year. We can have our discussions about most improved player. I think that Lowry making it totally understandable. Shea finishing ahead, understandable. Like, and I think I'm not even going crazy on Monty winning because he actually did make really good moves that helped the Kings win this year, even beyond Sabonis. Even though I think that he's getting a lot for the Sabonis trade, but I mean those other guys and I'll go back on Zanuck because while I'll admit yes that Gobert trade was lopsided. I just don't think to me, it's like you're forecasting something that you don't know how it's going to turn out. That was a team that was in the playoffs last year. This year, they didn't make the playoffs or the play-in.
Worse
yet,
they
have these assets.
Just missed it, so they don't have a lottery. They don't have
right. They didn't finagle it enough to where they can get a really impactful player in the draft. Like you're giving them saying based on I think they're going to be really good in a couple of years because they should get good draft picks. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if they're going to draft well. I don't think he should have been even in the discussion for this.
Not to mention the fact some of the best trades are the trades you don't make. Knicks didn't trade 3 first-round picks for DeJounte Murray. Instead, signed Jalen Brunson. That worked out beautifully. And they didn't trade Julius Randle. They didn't sell low on Julius Randle, who I thought they probably should have at least very seriously considered. And I would have been mistaken. Turns out Leon Rose was right. So if we're looking at the big picture, you have to give a guy credit for the totality of the decisions. And I don't understand how you could possibly think that 7 executives all factoring into decisions when you factor in expectations heading into the season, results of the regular season, and the key pieces that you brought into the roster that ended the prior season. I just don't understand how Rose isn't higher. Again, McNair's probably the only guy I would say that deserves to be ahead of.
And if you want to really have a gag, I mentioned how Leon Rose got no first place votes. He got 2 second place votes and 1 third. The only guy, that got a first place vote outside of those 3 guys I mentioned, along with Joe Horace and James Jones, was someone who finished behind Leon Rose. You want to guess who it is?
I don't. Who? Tell me. Sean Marks.
Sean Marks. Sean Marks got a first place vote for Executive of the Year.
Bro, come on.
Sean Marks of the Brooklyn Nets. I mean, I don't even know where to begin with that. I know that I think these votes are public. I think there's a way to find.
Howard Beck tweeted, and the NBPA president, I assume he's right. He said these votes, unlike the MVP and the other stuff. Well, I don't know the reason. I don't know the rationale. Maybe it's because they don't want revenge from executives on writers.
Yeah, it makes sense. I guess media works a lot with the front office.
Right. So those guys, but yeah, those votes will not be made. But whoever voted for Brad Stevens and Mark should be called on the carpet.
Yeah, I mean, come on, Mark's I don't understand that. Even if you think he made good trades for that KD Kyrie thing, he had no choice. Right. Kyrie said, "Get me out of here." KD said, "Get me out." Yes. You don't get it. Then KD should get the award for best executive of the year for the Brooklyn Nets because he's the one that got them all those assets.
Yes.
So if KD doesn't demand a trade, he's still in Brooklyn, and Sean Marks wouldn't probably been a part of this. So. I mean, this was awful. I mean, I really, again, it's the Knicks. I don't expect good things. But when I saw 8th place for Leon Rose, I was like, 8 executive. And I'm seeing these names, and I'm like, come on. Brunson, most impactful signing. Hart, at least arguably most impactful trade. That enough should get you in the top 3. Yep. Any other GM, that would have been enough. That's
what they judge you by. Free agent signings and trades, essentially.
Right, exactly. And I'll be honest, I feel like this was, and I don't like the Garden media policy, but I think that this was some people feeling a way about Leon Rose not wanting to talk to anybody.
100%. You can't convince me the fact that he's which is ridiculous. He should.
I know.
It's so easy to answer soft questions with non
team he's got. Yeah.
It's ridiculous. So the fact that the Garden establishment enables him, allows him to do that is ridiculous.
It's awful. Yeah, we all agree with that.
He chooses to do it is ridiculous. There's no reason for it. It's inexcusable. All that being said, that clearly impacted people voting on his on his capability and whether he's one of the executive of the year. No question.
Yeah, so that was unfortunate. So Knicks go home empty-handed on the award season, but we do have All NBA. We do have All NBA defensive team. Knicks don't have any rookies, so we won't have to worry about that. So there's a chance maybe Mitchell Robinson, All defensive team, perhaps maybe first team, second team, unlikely, but we'll see. All NBA team, we got Brunson, you got Randall, so we'll see how that shakes out. But no awards for the Knicks. They get 2 finalists, so that was cool with Brunson and Quickly. But Leon Rose, man, 8th place in the executive of the year. That's, you guys gotta be better, man. That's terrible. Anyway, that's gonna. Go ahead.
The only thing that Rose cares about and Tibbs cares about and Brunson and Randall and Quickly, the Knicks are still playing. They got a chance to advance the second round. So you get them to the Eastern Conference Finals. They'll take that over individual awards.
Exactly. May basketball is happening in New York,
yes.
and that's really the most important thing that matters. And it's a testament to Rose and all these guys that have contributed in the front office and the coaching staff and the players. So let's keep it going. Let's have a much better performance than what we saw in Game 2, despite the W. So that's going to do it for this edition of Orange and Blue Bloods. I want to thank Alex Donno for joining us. He did awesome. Tommy, let people know where they can find you.
At Tommy Beer on Twitter.
You can find me, EJ_Stewart on Twitter, and Action EJ on Instagram and TikTok. Thank you guys again so much for checking us out. This is Orange and Blue Bloods, a New York Knicks podcast, Audacy WFAN original. You can catch all these episodes wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Make sure you hit the auto download feature on your streaming service to get these episodes. Every time we drop 3 times a week. So we'll have a preview of Game 3 later this week. So you can keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. That'll do it for now, though. Thank you guys so much again. For Tommy, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date on our latest podcast ventures. Links will be in the descriptions. And as always, thanks for watching, and we will see you in our next video.